So I'm right-handed, which is my dominant hand, so I'm gonna keep my yarn on my right side. It's easier if you're sitting by something like a bed where you can just sit on your right side, and I always keep my needles in my left hand. I will show this throughout the video. So let's start. In order to start a row, you would basically just tie it on. Don't double knot it, just a single knot. And there's two different ways to transfer it. You can either lift it up, twist, and put it back on the needle. And I'm putting it back as it originally was. Or if you have bound needles, circular bound like this, you can just actually slide it onto the other needle. Alright, so this next step is whenever you're starting, whatever you're making. We are making shawls for this, so it's called casting on. Usually I know there are a few different variants of it. The one I have always used, and when I was taught, that's how it was presented to me, it was casted on. So you're going to take the yarn, again, left hand, right hand. If you are left-handed, it will be switched for you. So you're going to take your index finger, twist it around this yarn, and then it connects right here. So you're going to pinch it, pull it off your finger, and twist it. And then you're going to put it on the needle. I didn't twist that enough. You're going to put it on the needle and then pull it so it's tightened. And then I am going to do that 50 to 75 more times. You can do it with either index finger, and as long as you are twisting it just one full time and then pulling it not too tight, but tight enough that it won't fall off the needle, it should end up looking something like that. And then you're just going to do that 50 to 75 stitches. If you have bigger needles, these I believe are size 6s or 7s. And then I would probably put 75 on these just because they're smaller. If you have bigger needles like these, you would want to put maybe 50. Now, obviously, I have finished making the stitches, but obviously that's not enough because these are extremely smaller needles. If you are using anything under 15, you're probably going to need to cast on about 150 stitches. It sounds like a lot. It is a lot. It's just the size of the needles. They will make smaller stitches, which will make everything else smaller. And with the requirements of our sizes right now, which is about 2 feet wide and at least 2 yards long, then you're going to need more stitches just to meet that requirement. Anyhow, just to show you how the stitches themselves are done. So empty needle and dominant hand, the needle with the stitches in the less dominant hand, and yarn is still to my dominant side. So I'm going to take this top stitch up here, and if this will cooperate, put the empty needle into it, and I'm going to take the yarn and go behind the needle in my right hand, and the yarn is actually going to go in between the two needles. And as I am pulling this needle out, I'm going to take the yarn piece that I wrapped around and keep it on so it'll look like that. And then that first stitch for the left needle, I will basically push off over the top. Now, for the first row, you will need to sort of tighten it. Just a little bit, not too much, or else you will actually break the yarn and then you have to restart. So I'm going to do that a few times as demonstration. And after a few stitches, you should notice that you are getting this sort of a pattern, and that's how it should look for the whole first row. But the second row on will be just slightly different, but basically the same concept of wrapping behind the needle and everything, you just won't tie in it. Alright, that's good. So, I'm at my end, and you might notice if you do relax, this yarn might twist together. Don't worry about it. Just try and make sure that the yarn in the middle does not become knotted. I'm going to show you guys how you are going to end your first row. There are two different ways of doing it. I always do it a certain way, but I am just doing the stitches as normal. And I think I failed to mention this earlier, but whenever you put the needles in the same stitch together, you can space it out just a little bit, but do not space it out too far. You may have to redo that stitch, and sometimes your yarn may want to come apart. You gotta make sure you have the whole stitch of yarn, just so you do not get into a tangle. Alright, so this was our first stitch that we started with. You have two options. You can either knit it, and then you'll just pull this string to tie in it, or you can simply push it off the needle and leave it at that. I am going to knit it just for a demonstration, but if you do not want to knit it, that's totally up to you. One issue you may come across is that it will become knotted, which is the issue I'm having right now. If that does happen, if you ever get a knot and need to redo that stitch, you would just take that stitch and pull it off, and then pull the yarn from the ball. And then if you still had stitches on this, you would just continue going. So that is our first row, and the first row will make the edge, just so you know. And whenever you start your second row, you are going to go at it as a normal stitch. You go in, yarn in the back, between the two, pull out with the new stitch, push the old stitch off. Now, I'm not tying these. The first row is the only one that you will actually tie in. So you are just normally knitting these. There are actually two different types of stitches. There's the knitting or the purl stitch. In this tutorial we are using the knitting stitch, and we are using that just because that is the easiest one and the beginner or learner level sort of one. After you knit a few shawls, you could probably find a video online or find an instructor to teach you the purl stitch. Alright, so I am on the last 3 stitches of my second row. I am going to stitch these, and then I'm going to explain something for just 1 second. Alright. So that's what it would look like. That's the second row. And whenever you are done with a row, you of course want to switch needles. So, your empty one is still in your dominant hand. And after each row, you are going to start it with the basic knitting stitch again. And you are going to continue knitting, switch needles, knitting stitch, continue the knitting stitch over and over and over again until you reach that 3 to 5 feet mark of how long it should be. Now, how long should a shawl be? That's a personal preference. It must be long enough to wrap around your shoulders or someone else's shoulders. So about, anywhere from 3.5 to 5 feet average. It can be longer, though, as long as you can wrap it around your shoulders and it feels comfortable, you're good. So I'm going to just show the first few stitches of this. And then as you are knitting, you want to try to keep the stitches on the left needle somewhere near the top, but not too far up on the top, because they will slip off as you are knitting, and then that becomes a hassle trying to retrieve them. Now, just to show you, if you lose one, usually it will stay like that. You can just slip it back onto the needle. Sometimes it will unravel and then you have to re-ravel it. It is very annoying whenever that happens. So, main point, be careful whenever you are knitting. It is not that hard to grasp onto. This is a very basic beginner learning sort of level sort of thing. It's like a bigger scarf in a way. So, just take your time. Be careful with where you are dropping stitches or putting them and how you are knitting them. And just keep doing that until you are satisfied. After you have knitted a shawl, you could then, if you wanted, learn to make hats or scarves or pillowcases or bags or blankets or whatever else you wanted to. Alright, so this is 3 rows. That is the basic pattern. So you are going to want to make sure that what you are knitting is looking like that if you are using the basic knitting stitch. Or if you have bigger needles, the stitches will be bigger, so obviously it will be a little bit bigger. Just to show you for reference, this is a blanket and you can still see the rows. This is 200 stitches. It's a lot more because it is a blanket and not a shawl, but you can see the basic rows in that, just like on these. That is just for reference. Just make sure you are on track. So, I know this is not a whole shawl yet, but this is just to show you guys, but I am going to do the casting off stitches. Now, to clarify with that, after you have gotten the full length of your shawl, you have knitted the last row that you believe that you need, then you do what's called the casting off row, which will make a second border. So you know how the first row made that first border? The last row is going to make a second border. I am going to show you how to do that today, and this will basically end your shawl and you are done with it after that. So, again, less dominant hand, yarn still to the right, or whatever your dominant side is. I'm taking just 1 stitch, I am taking 2. So I take the first 2 stitches and I wrap around just like usual in between the 2 needles, and I pull out just like usual with that new stitch, and then I push these 2 over the top. Now when I go to this next stitch, I am only taking 1 stitch, not 2. Whenever you're starting the casting off row, you will take 2 stitches for the first new stitch, but after that you will only use 1 stitch. You do not go back to the 2 stitch. And so I knit like normal, but now is where it gets a little bit complicated. This is something you will practice throughout the whole row. So you will have 2 stitches on this needle at one time, but that is the most. So you will take this bottom stitch either with your needle or just with your fingers, and you will pull it up and over the needle, but leaving that top stitch there. And then you will 1 stitch, knit, bottom stitch, pull over, 1 stitch, knit, bottom stitch, pull over, repeat. You are going to do this for every stitch in this row. Just be very careful that you are not going back to forming 2 stitches into 1 stitch. That will mess up the pattern. Some people do that just to hurry it along, but I would not advise that. That would very much mess up the pattern and actually make your shawl sort of crumble up at the edge, which is not an effect you are probably looking for. And while you are doing this, just make sure that you are not making your stitches too tight or too loose, and that you are easily pulling them over and you are not accidentally pushing off that top stitch. The bottom stitch goes over the top one and off the needle. The top one stays on the needle. That is how you are creating this edge. Now, so far as you can see, you can sort of see the second edge coming along. It does, as I said, form a pattern, which is why you would not want to break that pattern. It may cause bumps, or it may look like you jumped a few stitches. It usually does not look very good. It could crumple it. Just doing the one stitch pattern is a little more time consuming, I'll admit, but in the long run it does make a prettier shawl. And we are not going for quantity here, we are going for quality. So I just dropped these stitches on accident, so I have to redo this one. Alright. Whenever you drop any stitches, even if it's just one or two, or a whole lot more, keep calm. And make sure that you do not unravel it by freaking out and hurrying to pick them back up. Keep calm and slowly either weave your needle through them again or pick them up and put them back onto your needle. Alright, now, here are our last two stitches. Here's 1, 2. Now, I'm going to pull that over. And then, there are two ways of doing this. You can either tie it, or you can cut off the piece attached to your ball yarn and take the end and thread it through there and pull it a little bit and then cut it off. Either way, that will end it. And if you are tying it, I always double knot it just to make sure it will not come undone and then unravel. But that would be the general pattern of a shawl with this size needle. Like I said before, if it's bigger, it will be more like the blanket. Alright, so I have looked through a few of the knitted shawls and picked out the ones with the most variety, basically. So this is one example. So, you know, wide enough to wrap around your shoulders, you know, that sort of thing. You can see the stitching there. It's probably, I guess, about a size, 7, 8, maybe 9 needle. I'm not really sure. I never really asked. That's one of them. This is another one. Basically, same size looking needle, wide enough to wrap around your shoulders. That is thinner yarn. This is just a little bit thicker. Probably about the same size needle though. This is a dark basic color, unlike the two that transition in between colors. And the next one I'm going to show is not really a shawl, it is a blanket, but it is a prime example of what you can do after you knit for a little bit. You can transfer between balls of yarn, and it can turn out quite pretty. This was a size 10 needle. This took about 3 weeks to make. It's about 5 feet by 6 foot, so a pretty decent size. But knitting is just one way to make shawls. There are other different ways. Obviously, you can quill them or crochet them or weave them in any possible way, but this is the one that I was taught when I was younger. So that's what I picked to base the project off of. And thank you.